Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics, Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Heminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by Five Dimes and hosted on MMAoddsbreaker.com. I'm Brian Heminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 55 event, which takes place in Brazil. Now, if you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 2 total bouts. Now also pay special attention to our MMAoddsbreaker.com staff picks for UFC Fight Night 56. They're usually posted following the weigh-ins, and if we have any last-minute changes or updates to our picks, they will be posted there. So that's where the official picks will be. Now, we briefly looked back at our last event at the beginning of the UFC Fight Night 55 Premium Oddscast, so if you want a full, detailed results, check that one out. Now, back to the present, UFC Fight Night 56 features an 11-fight card in total and will air on UFC Fight Pass, Fox Sports 2, and Fox Sports 1. So let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the preliminary card on Fight Pass will be a welterweight contest between Ultimate Fighter veteran Wagner Silva, who is 3-2, taking on undefeated prospect Colby Covington, who is 6-0. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Covington minus 750, the comeback on Silva plus 450. Line had steady action on the underdog. Right now, by the way, lines are courtesy of 5dimes.eu, so every line I quote today is courtesy of them. And right now, over at 5 Dimes, it's Covington minus 450, the comeback on Silva plus 330. So again, steady action on the underdog, Silva. You know what? I know it's kind of a steep line. My opener was at least, and it seems like it's a little bit more of a fair line right now at minus 450 or so. But Covington's got a ton of hype, and I mean, after his UFC debut, definitely seemed to live up to it. I mean, he's got that outstanding wrestling background for sure. He's training at a good camp. He's putting things together well. His stand-up continues to improve. He could be effective on the feet, but his wrestling and his ground and pound and his overall submission game is outstanding. And Silva, unfortunately, he's a pretty well-rounded fighter, but grappling seems to be his best attribute as well. His stand-up game is okay, but it's still developing as well. And, I mean, he typically needs to get the fight to the floor to have success. And against a guy like Covington, which has that wrestling background, he's not going to be able to out-wrestle Covington. So I think Silva's going to have to almost get top position on Covington, or maybe even scramble to take his back to maybe possibly submit him in that type of situation to get the W here. If not, Silva will probably get controlled, might get pounded out, or even might get submitted himself. So I think there's way more ways for Covington to win. I think if the fight stays standing, Covington should have an edge on the feet as well. He's got a little bit more pure power. I know Silva's going to have a little bit of height, but as far as pure reach goes, they should be about equal there as well. So to me, I believe the hype in Covington, honestly. I think the guy is a legit prospect, and he's going to continue to improve his overall skill set. And I do think that he's going to find his way to get the fight to the floor, get positional control, and have his way kind of with Silva. Like I said, he probably finishes either ground and pound or by submission. So my official pick is going to be Covington. And as far as the line goes, I think it is potentially some parlay material out there for those of you guys that like parlaying some of the higher favorites. I think Covington might be a guy to include in a parlay or two. So that's where I stand on it. I think Covington is going to come away with another successful win in the UFC.
Yeah, and this is a case where I'm all aboard the Colby Covington hype train. This guy is a fantastic wrestler. He's a terrific athlete, trains out of a great gym, an American Top Team. And while in his UFC debut he took on a completely overmatched Chinese fighter, this time around he's taking on a completely overmatched Brazilian fighter. Wagner Silva, it was just not that good on the Ultimate Fighter Brazil. It showed in his fight against Abreu on the finale, and honestly, Covington is probably going to do the exact same thing to him. Silva does not handle pressure well on the feet, And while Covington isn't a great striker, he basically pressures his opponent into making a mistake and then ducks under something, shoots in, has a beautiful double leg, and then just dumps his opponents on the ground and starts unloading elbows and punches. And once he postures up, this guy is extremely dangerous. He hits very hard, big left hands on the ground, big right hooks as well. You gotta watch out for everything from him. He will open you up. And honestly, I think Colby Covington is going to be a force in the UFC welterweight division as long as he keeps developing the right way. And there's nothing that I saw in Wagner Silva's skill set, whether it's his stand-up skills or on the ground, that makes me think that he has a chance here. He's going to get dragged to the ground when he's standing. He's going to get pressured on the feet, and he's going to get beat up on the canvas. And unless Covington just punches himself out in the first round and doesn't get a finish and gasses out, then I think Covington just steamrolls. So I'm going to pick Colby Covington. Now, kicking off the Fox Sports 2 prelims is a bantamweight contest featuring UFC debuting Thomas Almeida, who is 17-0, who's taking on Tim Gorman, who's 9-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Almeida opens minus 400. The comeback on Gorman plus 280. A little bit of movement coming in on the dog. It's now minus 350. Almeida, the comeback is plus 260 on Gorman. Interesting spot because Almeida is another one of these very hyped prospects coming in. He's the current legacy, well, he was, I should say, before he's making his UFC debut, of course, the legacy fighting bantamweight champ, and the guy is extremely talented. I mean, he's got the hype, and it's another guy that probably is going to live up to the hype in most cases. He's an outstanding striker. That's his best attribute by far. He's got long range, uses his reach pretty well, works behind his lead jab well, and he throws combos. That's one of the most impressive thing about him. I mean, he knows how to mix things up well with his kicks, knees, elbows, everything. And he even mixes things up enough to go to the body, and he can hurt you there as well. So the guy on the feet is something special. He's definitely fun to watch. His strike defense overall is pretty solid. He keeps his hands up well. So there's a lot of good things about Almeida. The only question mark to me is, can he fend off good wrestlers, or can he keep the fight from hitting the floor and getting controlled by a guy that's going to be kind of that mold? And if anything, Gorman is kind of that type of guy. Gorman is a pretty solid wrestler. That's why I guess the early action did come in on Gorman a little bit as a dog, because I mean, stylistically it's an interesting matchup. I mean, Almeida, again, has that hype, and he's got those intangibles on the feet, but Gorman's not exactly a slouch. I know he got beat by Gagnon in his last fight, or his official UFC debut, we should say. But Gorman is a pretty tough guy. He's hard to stop. He's gonna know that he has to kind of win this fight probably to stick around and keep his job in the UFC. And he is a pretty good grinder. He likes to get the fight to the floor, drop some ground and pound. He's got some power on the feet as well. He might not be as technical as Almeida on the feet, of course, but he still has that kind of wrestler's power to go along with it. So he's not going to be a joke anywhere the fight goes, and he definitely is going to pursue the takedowns early and often. So Almeida is going to have to keep this fight standing, and if he does, he's going to be able to probably do enough damage to make life interesting, to say the least, in Gorman. If not, probably get a stoppage here. Gorman, again, he's tough. He's hard to finish. He's going to have a ton of heart, and he's going to have the will to win, but I think Almeida is probably going to do enough to keep the fight standing and do enough damage along the way to at least outpoint Gorman. But more than likely, I think Almeida has that kind of hype around him that he probably will get the stoppage here against Gorman, even if Gorman is game. So I am going to pick Almeida to win. As far as betting goes, it's kind of a dangerous spot because, like I said, I would like to see Almeida get tested on the ground a little bit in his takedown defense, and Gorman is probably going to provide that kind of test. So interesting spot for betting, but as far as pure pick goes, I'm definitely going to be on Almeida.
And I'm in complete agreement here. Almeida is 17-0 for a reason. The guy's stand-up is just disgusting. He has really powerful overhand right, and what really impresses me is not just that he's undefeated after so many fights in the bantamweight division, it's that he has finished, I believe, every single guy. He is downright nasty with his power, and he can hurt you with kicks, with punches. He has very good accuracy. He has solid defense, both standing and with his takedown defense. The reason he hasn't really been tested on the ground is because he does such a good job of keeping the fight standing. His defensive wrestling is very good. constantly you see him fend off takedowns. He has a quick sprawl. His reaction times are spectacular. Even when he overcommits to a strike, he's able to recover and fend off the takedown attempts. So I've been very impressed with what Talmas Almeida brings in terms of his defense. Now, offensively, the guy is just nasty. He has so much power, and he can mix it up both to the head and body. One of his most recent fights, he finished his opponent with a beautiful combination that finished with some body strikes that dropped him. So he throws everything together very fluidly. He's just a monster on the feet. Gorman, though, one thing I really like about Gorman is just how tough he is. Mitch Gagnon is a fighter that has built a reputation around finishing a lot of opponents in the first round, and Gorman took him the distance. Even if he didn't win, that's impressive in its own right, the fact that he made Gagnon work for everything. So it's going to be very interesting because Gorman is going to need takedowns. He is a wrestler that basically relies on ground and pound to win his fights. If he gets stuck standing against Almeida, he's going to be in for a world of hurt. And he needs to try to get this fight to the ground. And he needs to make this fight ugly if he wants to win it. Because if he leaves Almeida at space, if he even sticks around in the clinch too long, I think he's going to eat a lot of elbows and knees. So he needs to get on top, take away Almeida's weapons, and just start pummeling him. And if he doesn't, then it's going to be a long night, or maybe a short night, depending on, which Talmas Almeida shows up. So, unfortunately for Gorman, I just don't think that his wrestling is going to be enough to overcome Almeida's takedown defense. And, I think that Talmas Almeida is going to win pretty convincingly here and make a very big splash in the bantamweight division for his UFC debut. Now, moving up to the lightweight division, we have Leandro Silva, who is 11-2-1, taking on Charlie Brenneman, who is 19-7. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Brenneman -135, a comeback on Silva -105, so basically a pick 'em with a slight lean towards Brenneman. The line has steady flipped and action has come in on Silva. He's now -180, the comeback on Brenneman +150. And if I'm not mistaken, by far the biggest movement on the card from top to bottom, out of all the lines we're going to go over today. And it's kind of strange in a way. I guess people are kind of fading Brenneman. I understand why. I mean, man, the guy has so much potential with his grappling game, with his wrestling background. I think honestly at welterweight or lightweight, he's one of the best pure wrestlers, grapplers in the weight class as far as controlling, getting to fight to the floor and just grinding people out. I mean, he does that great. But the problem with Brenneman is if he can't get the fight to the floor, obviously his chin is suspect. And the guy keeps on getting knocked out over and over and over again. I mean, now a total of 4, I believe, in his career, and it's not going to get any better for him. I mean, the guy's getting a little bit older. He's 33 years old now. So that's not going to really help matters much. I mean, that's why I think people are kind of fading Brenneman. But the problem here is Silva is probably a little bit underrated as far as pure striking goes, for sure. But he doesn't have that devastating knockout power. Now, that doesn't mean Silva can't catch Brenneman and put him out, because I think it doesn't take much these days to do that. So wouldn't be surprised if it does happen. But the thing that bothers me about Silva is, I mean, he's kind of he's a well-rounded fighter, known for striking, known more so for his grappling. He's got more wins by submission. So he's a pretty capable grappler. But against Brenneman, I think he's going to kind of lack in that area, because Brenneman's wrestling should be able to dictate control the pace of the fight, and Brenneman should be able to get a takedown or two. I mean, Silva has been put on his back in the UFC several times, and I think we're probably going to see that happen again. So Silva's going to have to fend Brenneman off and keep it upright and then try to land that knockout punch, I think, to win this fight. Now, again, it's very possible he does that. As far as Silva getting top control on Brenneman, maybe after he rocks him on the feet, it's possible. But I think Brenneman's wrestling is far superior to Silva. So it's one of those situations, striker versus grappler basically here. In a way, even if Silva's not really known for his striking, that's kind of what the matchup is here. And I'm going to lean a little bit more towards Brenneman here. But again, it's not a very confident lean, because I can't see Brenneman winning the first round like it seems like he always does and then get knocked out in the second. So that's the caution here I think that you have to be concerned about. But Silva does tend to fade as the fight goes on. So he'll be a little bit less effective in rounds 2 or 3 if it gets that far. But still, it's one of those situations where I think Silva either gets the knockout possibly, I guess, squeaks out a decision if he just keeps the fight upright, not points Brenneman on the feet. But I think if the fight does hit the cards, more than likely it's going to be Brenneman getting the nod because he should be able to control the fight. So my official pick, and it's not a confident one, is going to be Brenneman.
And I completely agree. Honestly, Charlie Brenneman is a incredibly good wrestler, and he's in a relatively good spot here, mainly because Leandro Silva does not pack a lot of power, and the other thing is he's a little timid on the feet. I don't know if that was just because he was facing people that, he just thought were way better strikers than him, or maybe he just was intimidated by the bright lights of the octagon, but he just has not really shown up in terms of his stand-up ability on the feet. And Brenneman could definitely take advantage of that. If he doesn't have to worry about getting knocked out, it's going to be a lot easier for him to focus on his wrestling and not even have to set up his takedowns as much because his wrestling is there. It's always been there. I mean, this is a guy that out-wrestled Johnny Hendricks for a round. This is a guy that out-wrestled Rick Story for 3 rounds, out-wrestled Danny Castillo in his last fight for a round. He always seems to out-wrestle his opponents. It's all been about his chin, though. Every single time that he loses, it's been either he got rocked and then submitted, or he just gets flat out knocked out. And this time around, I really think there's a good chance that he does not get knocked out. And if that doesn't happen, then Charlie Brenneman is one of the toughest fighters to beat in the UFC. His wrestling is that good. And as he just needs to focus on it and shoot in, ignore the stand-up, don't even screw around with it. I don't care if Leandro Silva doesn't hit hard. Why even risk it? So Charlie Brenneman needs to shoot in, put Leandro Silva on his back, and keep him there, and wear him down to the point where he can barely lift his arms to throw a punch, or his legs to throw a kick. That's all Charlie Brenneman needs to focus on, because his skills are there. I mean, this guy is competitive with some very good fighters, and that's really all this fight boils down to. Honestly, Leandro Silva is just not that good. I don't know how he was able to rack up so many wins outside the UFC, but from everything I've seen under the bright lights of the octagon, he just does not have what it takes to be a UFC caliber fighter. And unless he lands something nasty out of nowhere against Brenneman, then I think this is going to be a repeat of pretty much every Charlie Brenneman UFC victory, which pretty much includes a lot of takedowns, a lot of stifling top position, with just enough activity to avoid getting stood up. So my pick is going to be Charlie Brenneman here to pull off the upset. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Diego Lima, who is 9-2, taking on short notice replacement Jorge de Oliveira, who is 7-0. Now Nick, where did you open this fight, and how did the public ship things so far?
I opened Lima minus 300, the comeback on Oliveira plus 220. Right now over at Dimes, the line is Lima minus 325, the comeback on Oliveira plus 250. So staying ballpark with maybe a little bit more action coming in on Lima early on. This fight's actually interesting. I mean, Oliveira's coming in late replacement. He usually fights at 155, so he's taking this fight just to get into UFC at 170. So he's going to be a bit undersized. I mean, Lima's going to be the taller fighter. He's going to have some reach. He's going to have some physical advantages over Oliveira as well. And the other question mark about Oliveira coming into this fight is that he's fought relatively low-level competition, of course, on the Brazilian scene. Now, the guy is definitely talented in the striking aspect of the game. He's athletic. He's got decent footwork, speed, and power to go along with it. But the problem with Oliveira is he is lacking a little bit in the takedown defense department and his wrestling. But he has shown the ability to, once he's put on his back at times, scramble to top position, reverse things a little bit too. So that's a plus that you want to see in a fighter that's still developing a little bit in his overall game. But against Lima and the grappling ability of Lima, I mean, he's got nasty submissions. He's got decent overall wrestling, especially in this fight. Lima's wrestling should be able to control Oliveira there. And then on the feet, both these guys are definitely talented. Oliveira, I think, is a better pure striker, but Lima can definitely stand and bang. Now, of course, Lima's brother Douglas is kind of the more popular of the two fighters, and I think I'm mentioning it because I don't think Diego Lima is as talented as Douglas Lima. Douglas Lima's on another level, so I think a lot of hype on Diego kind of comes from his brother as well. And make no mistake, I mean, this Lima is pretty good. Diego Lima is pretty good, but he's not at quite the level that his brother is yet. But that being said, he's still in a favorable matchup here for him. I mean, he's dropping down to his weight class of 170, which he should be. He was on the Ultimate Fighter at 185, so this is a much better fit for Lima. So he should have more success. And again, in the physical attributes for him and the way his ground game has been effective in most cases against fighters that lack it, should be effective in this case as well. So my pick is honestly going to be Lima. I think if he gets a fight to the floor, it kind of should be an easy win for him here. Oliveira is very game, and I'm sure we're going to see him bounce back from this loss and fight and be competitive at 155 at some point throughout his career. But for right now in this spot, I got to pick Lima to win the fight.
And the fact that Oliveira is taking this fight on short notice isn't the only thing going against him. Obviously, he is the natural lightweight moving up, but he also has only fought, I believe, one time in the last 18 months. So he's rusty, and honestly, he's just not a very well-rounded fighter. This guy is more of a striker, and he's stepping in there at a 6-inch height disadvantage due to the weight class difference, and he's going to be at a significant reach disadvantage. That's a really big problem for somebody that focuses on their stand-up ability. Like, I really don't see how Oliveira is going to get anything going on the feet before Lima decides to eventually close the distance and take him to the ground. Now, I guess Oliveira's best chance is to maybe goad Lima into a stand-up battle. As we saw in his last fight, Lima did get exposed a little bit with his chin not being the best, and Oliveira does have some pretty good power, so if he connects with something solid, then he could pull off a monster upset. But again, will he be able to connect with something solid? I don't think so. If Lima's smart, if he has watched any film on this guy whatsoever, if he has any good fight IQ, he's going to be trying to take this fight to the ground and just work Oliveira over, because once he's on the canvas, he should be able to utilize that size and strength advantage, and he's either going to be able to land big shots on the ground or work for submissions. He has a very solid Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu acumen. So I really think that this is Diego Lima's fight to lose, and unless he decides to get cute and maybe prove something to himself just because his last fight he got knocked out at middleweight, then, he's going to win this fight. So we're just hoping that he has the fight IQ to pull it off. So my pick is Diego Lima. Now moving up to the middleweight division, we have Chau Magalhães, who is 8-1, taking on Trevor Smith, who's 12-5. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Magalhães minus 175, the comeback on Smith plus 135 right now. It's Magalhães minus 225 plus 175, so a little bit more action coming in on the favorites. Not that much surprised because, typically Smith doesn't get a lot of respect. Now, from the betting public, though, he has been getting some love, and he's been coming through. So if those of you guys that have been betting Smith as an underdog in most cases have cashed. So congrats. And you know what? Smith is one of those guys that's always been a little bit underrated throughout his career. But the problem with Smith is, again, I think his grappling ability is definitely legit, but his deficiency really is his chin is a little suspect. He's been knocked out 3 times throughout his career, and his cardio is very suspect at times. He starts to slow down as the fight goes, but he has improved a little bit in the cardio end of things, and it's seemed to help his chin out a little bit because his chin's been holding up a little bit better since he's been in the UFC. So that's impressive. But make no mistake, the best part of Smith's game is definitely, like I said, the grappling, the wrestling, his submission game. He's very talented along those lines, for sure. He could give a lot of problems to fighters out there that lack in those areas. But Magalhães is pretty solid in that department as well. I think on the feet it's going to be actually relatively close. Smith, even though, again, his grappling is his best attribute, he's shown some life at least a little bit in the stand-up department recently. He's improved that a little bit, but Magalhães has actually shown a little bit more life in that area. He's improved quite a bit. He's going to have a little bit more confidence coming into this fight because he's coming off that impressive knockout fight or knockout win over Zacharich. He's going to have that kind of confidence at an all-time high. He's going to think that he can knock Smith out, and that's a real legit possibility in this spot. Smith's defense is a little suspect, to say the least, and he has been knocked out quite a few times. So even though Magalhães isn't a real threat on the feet in most cases, coming in off that knockout and fighting Smith, that's a possibility. But overall, we should see a pretty competitive matchup. I mean, on the ground, these guys almost neutralize each other out a little bit. Smith can definitely hang with most, like I said, on the ground, and Magalhães, typically that's what he likes to do. He likes to take the fight to the floor, look for takedowns. His wrestling's really not that great. His takedown accuracy is pretty weak. Because against actually solid guys that can keep the fight upright, I should say that. He hasn't had much success in that department, but he's definitely going to try to get Smith on the ground. If not, like I said, he's going to come out swinging pretty heavy, and he could possibly land and clip Smith in that area too. So it's hard not to pick Magalhães here because I think he's a little bit younger, a little bit fresher, and he's improving at a much better pace than Smith. So I do think that Magalhães has kind of more ways to win this fight. It'll be a close decision if it hits the scorecards, because it seems like all of Smith's fights, if they do hit the cards, are pretty close. So I'm leaning towards Magalhães there. The fact that it's in Brazil doesn't hurt his chances either. And there's that possibility that Magalhães has a little bit more knockout power to knock Smith out. So more ways to win the fight. I got to pick Magalhães, but this is kind of a tough one to bet.
Yeah, I completely agree. The main thing that's making me lean towards Magalhães is actually the way that he won his last fight and the way that Trevor Smith lost his most recent fight. So Magalhães obviously just came out guns blazing against Luke Zachrich, who's a lot better fighter than he showed in that bout, and was able to score a very quick knockout. And when Trevor Smith lost his last fight, it was to Thales Leites, and Leites came out guns blazing, bum rushed him, and completely overwhelmed him and knocked him out. So if Magalhães actually just decides to do the exact same thing, he could very well get the exact same result. He hits very hard. Now, I'm not saying he's the most technical guy out there, but he is steadily improving, and it could happen again. Trevor Smith is definitely the type of opponent that he could pull that same finishing maneuver off against. Now, if this fight ends up being technique for technique, it's going to be a lot more difficult. Magalhães is still pretty raw, but I've got to give the guy credit. He's won 3 fights in a row in the UFC inexplicably, and he is getting better. He was young, he was very raw when he first debuted in the UFC, and while he still is pretty raw, he's shown improvements in all areas, and I think his stand-up has been his best improvement. And if he really wants to win this fight, I think if he just turns this into an ugly brawl against Trevor Smith, it's going to be Magalhães' chin that holds up better, and I do think that he packs a little bit more power on the feet. So he could definitely knock Trevor Smith out. Now on the ground, this gets a little more tricky. Magalhães does come from a very good grappling background, but the ground is Trevor Smith's bread and butter. He has some decent wrestling, and his scrambling and jiu-jitsu game is very solid. Now he's not going to submit a lot of people in the UFC, but he can transition pretty well, and Smith does a very good job of getting on top and holding positions that help him win rounds. I mean, there's a reason he's been able to pick up some wins in the UFC. Now, Trevor Smith is not a world beater by any means. Honestly, he's not just a gatekeeper. He's basically a gatekeeper to, if you lose to him, you don't belong in the UFC type of gatekeeper. I believe just about everybody that's lost to him so far is no longer employed or is about to be no longer employed. So that is the main problem here. But I do think that Caio Magalhães is the younger fighter with more room for growth and has a little bit less wear and tear, and so I'm going to side with him. So not crazy confident about it because of all the reasons, but I do think that Magalhães could pull this one out. Now the final bout on the Fox Sports 2 prelims is a battle between a pair of Ultimate Fighter Latin America's veterans in Diego Rivas, who is 5-0, who's taking on Rodolfo Rubio, who's 12-6. Now Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Rivas -210, the comeback on Rubio +160. Looking at the line right now, it's Rivas -125, the comeback on Rubio's -105. So definitely a lot of support coming in early on the underdog. And this is another case where we've had some significant line movement, obviously, like we were talking about the Silva Brenneman fight early on. So support on Rubio, I guess I can understand it. He is the more experienced fighter. Both these guys are tough Latin America competitors. I should mention that off the rip. And as far as Rubio go, he does have some skill in all areas, but his best attribute is definitely the ground game, the sub game. On the feet, he does like to throw with some power, but I think the best attribute on the feet for him is his leg kicks. He likes to throw those often, and he can be a little bit effective with it. On the show, he really didn't look all that impressive, honestly. And even in his first fight, he was losing that fight. He had to come back and win by armbar the second round, because basically his opponent faded and gassed a little bit. So it was a nice come from behind win. But then in the second fight, I mean, he just got totally blitzed and he ended up quitting. Now, of course, he was getting, really hammered on at the time that he kind of verbally submitted. And he quit. So, but that still stands out in my mind and doesn't really sit well with me, to be honest with you. So Rubio does have more of the skill set, but I question kind of his heart, and that skill set isn't that overly impressive. He's not great at any particular area. Again, his best attribute probably being ground. Now, going over to Rivas is a little bit younger. He's going to be a little bit bigger. He did lose in the first round as well. Or he lost in the first round, I should say, period, on the Ultimate Fighter Latin America. So he looked okay. I mean, he's aggressive. He's got this aggressive brawling style. And he did tend to fade a little bit as the fight went on. But he does prefer, again, almost a similar type of fighter as Rubio. He does have that aggressive brawling style on the feet, but he prefers to take things to the floor, look for his wrestling. His takedown game, is okay. When he's not throwing bombs on the feet, he's actually pretty effective with his wrestling game. Aggressiveness, though, does cause him to gas a little bit more than your typical fighter, so he needs to get that in check a little bit. And it does also leave openings that can be exploited by most fighters. Now, that being said, I do think there's more better upside to Rivas than there is Rubio. I think the good attributes about Rivas really is his heart, his speed, and his power. And he's going to continue to improve because, again, he's a little bit younger. I think he's a little bit fresher. And I think the size advantage and his overall skill set matches up pretty good with Rubio. So it should be a pretty competitive fight. I do think that Rivas is going to have the advantage. If his cardio keeps up and hangs in there, he should really beat Rubio. So that's the only question mark in my mind, is if Rivas does kind of outlast. If he starts fading a little bit and quits, that's going to be a problem, obviously. But again, I think he has a little bit more heart than Rubio, and I think if anybody has more quit in him, it's probably Rubio. So my pick is actually going to be Rivas. I'm going to go against the public action coming in on Rubio earlier. I think they're wrong here, and I think that Rivas is the better fighter, and he has more upside. So Rivas is going to be successful in his UFC debut. And let me mention, both these guys are barely UFC level, at least right now. So there is a lot of growth left, especially for Rivas. So let's see if they get better. But for right now, I am going to pick Rivas.
And I agree. The main reason is, honestly, the growth potential for Rivas. Now, if these guys had been paired up on the show, then I think Rubio had a slight chance of pulling out the victory. But again, I just don't see a lot of upside in Rubio. He's just, he just seems like, even though he's not even 30 years old yet, he just seems a little set in his ways. He doesn't offer much on the feet at all. And in terms of ground skills, he's more of a guard player. He's not a great top control guy. He doesn't hold position very well, although he will shoot in for takedowns. It just seems like Rivas is going to be the guy that is able to get the top control if he wants it. In terms of the stand-up, neither guy's really that good on the feet, but I do think that Rivas works at a better gym, and being so young, he definitely has that room to develop. Something I find interesting about Rivas is I think he's the first Chilean UFC fighter, so props to him for that. And he definitely is very aggressive. I was actually very impressed with his aggressive pursuit of the takedown in his first fight on the show, and he was holding his own there. He just slowed down a little bit, gassed, and his opponent took advantage. So that is a concern in this bout. If Rivas slows down, Rubio could definitely take advantage because he was able to pull out the late second round submission in his quarterfinal bout, and he's definitely very dangerous with those arm bars, with leg locks, all kinds of transitions from precarious positions. So Rivas is going to have to be on his guard at all times if he wants to pull out this victory. So that being said, I am going to go with Diego Rivas here. I just think his work with Reign MMA is going to pay off, and this guy has a lot more potential than Rodolfo Rubio, who I just feel isn't going to improve that much from his time on the show. So I'm going with Rivas. Now, kicking off the Fox Sports 1 main card is a women's strawweight bout featuring Juliana Lima, who's 6-2 overall, taking on Nina Ansaroff, who is 6-3. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Well, I opened Ansaroff minus 150 to come back on Lima plus 110. And right now it is minus 165 for Ansaroff, and the comeback on Lima is plus 135. So just a little bit more support coming in on Ansaroff here. I'm expecting a really competitive fight back and forth. These girls really match up well together, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if it hits the cards and we see a controversial or a split decision type of fight. But getting right into it, Ansaroff, she does have a Taekwondo background. So she has some stand-up game obviously to go along with actually a pretty decent and underrated wrestling game. She does look for takedowns. She's a pretty well-rounded fighter overall. Smart, decent fight IQ for sure. And her losses, one good thing about Ansaroff is her losses have come to really solid competition, and she's been competitive in those fights as well. So even though her resume or her record doesn't look that great at 6-3, you gotta look closer and you gotta respect that a little bit. Again, going back to her striking though, she does have some decent striking. She could be very effective. She has some power. I mean, she has shown power and knockout capabilities in the past. She's got 4 wins by KO actually. So she does have that advantage, I think, a little bit over Lima. I mean, but they are so similar in several areas that even the stand-up realm will be close, but I do favor Ansaroff there. Ansaroff actually has a very underrated, takedown game. She's got a fast single leg, decent ground and pound when she does get you to the top or on the floor and stays on top, and she could drop some bombs on you for sure. But Lima, on the other hand, is a well-rounded fighter as well. She is more of a grappling-based fighter. Again, her stand-up game continues to improve, so she's okay on the feet, but she should get a little bit outclassed by Ansaroff there. So she's going to look for the takedowns in control and ground and pound, and she can be effective while she's doing that game. I mean, obviously, there's going to be, I think this fight, we'll see a little bit of clinch work up against the cage as well from these girls back and forth, and I think both of them will get top position at some point. Because Lima can, even though she's kind of more of a grappling-based fighter, looks for wrestling and takedowns, she can be put on her back as well. So both these girls are susceptible to takedowns, and both these girls like to take the fight to the floor and do some work there as well. So I think I'm going to favor Ansaroff slightly here as well, because she does have a little bit more ways to win this fight. I don't think she knocks Lima out, but it's a possibility because she does have a little bit of power. And I think that she could do enough damage possibly to steal a very close decision. So slight lean towards Ansaroff for me. And it's another tricky fight to bet, honestly.
And I'm in agreement. The main thing here that I'm concerned about, though, is the fact that Ansaroff's, maybe her, timidity at times. She is a very dangerous striker. She has some good power. Her kicks can be very dangerous, and she can finish fights with them due to her Taekwondo background. But every once in a while, she just sits back too much and lets her opponent dictate the pace. Now, Lima is the type of fighter that's going to get right in Ansaroff's face and try to take her down. And if she's successful, then, she's gonna win this fight. Lima needs to get takedowns. She needs top position. She needs to push Ansaroff into the fence. She needs to really take away Ansaroff's weapons. And basically, Ansaroff's biggest strength is definitely her kicking game at distance. So if she's not able to do that, this is going to end up being a grappling match. And while Ansaroff is pretty solid in that department, I do think that Lima could potentially stifle her there. But all in all, the main reason I like Ansaroff to win this fight is the fact that, she has spent a majority of her time in her career at flyweight, which is 125, 10 pounds heavier, and she's been competitive in there against some very, very competent female fighters. She's fought the likes of current Invicta flyweight champion Barb Honchak and many others. She beat Luna Holland in her Invicta fight. So she definitely has much better experience against significantly better opposition than Lima's fought. So I really think that Ansaroff can come into Brazil and pull this victory out. She may be 6-3, but all 3 of her losses are against very legitimate opposition. And while the same thing can be said for Lima, I think Ansaroff has much better wins on her record, and she's going to be a little bit bigger and stronger, and that could really be the difference. So my pick is Ansaroff. Now, moving up to the welterweight division, we have Claudio Silva, who is 10-1, taking on UFC newcomer Leon Edwards, who's 8-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Edwards minus 140, Silva even money. That was my opening line. And right now, looking over 5 dimes, it's actually Edwards minus 195. The comeback is actually plus 160 on Silva now. So a little bit surprised that the public came in on Edwards. Silva is a little bit more well known, I think. I mean, he's coming off of, I guess you could say impressive, debut win over Prescott, but that was at, middleweight, and now he's dropping to 170. So what you have in Silva is your typical, another grappling based fighter, a guy that looks for takedowns, looks to control you, looks to submit you. His stand-up game isn't really that good. Nothing too impressive there. He does have a little bit of power. And again, that power should actually carry down pretty well with him at 170. And maybe you see a positive impact on his cardio and his, overall, wrestling game too as well, dropping down the weight class. But he's fighting a very talented and tough fighter in Edwards. I was nothing but impressed while I was studying footage on Edwards. Simply put, I think he's just a winner. He's very impressive overall. His only loss in his MMA career has been by DQ. A little background on Edwards. He is the former Bama welterweight champion. So he's won gold in a smaller organization, of course. He's more of a striking based fighter for sure. He's fast, has a ton of power on the feet, very solid clinch game, knees especially, man. He's got great timing with his knees. I mean, he fights these guys that want to take him down because the striking's so good, and man, he just makes them pay for it over and over again with those knees. They're devastating, really. So he's got good timing with it. He knows what to do in that situation. But the problem is, again, Silva is going to look for these takedowns. He's going to look to get Edwards on his back. And if Edwards doesn't fend off the takedowns, he could be in some trouble once the fight hits the floor. Now, Edwards is well-rounded. He's got a submission game to go along with it. But compared to the level of grappling that Silva has, it's not a good thing to kind of tangle around too much with Silva. But overall, even though Edwards can be placed on his back, I think he's improving in the takedown defense department. I mean, you look from fight to fight, he's definitely, again, tested often in that department, and he seems to show some signs of solid takedown D overall. So I think his cardio's decent enough where he's going to be able to fend off a lot of things, a lot of takedown attempts by Silva. And if he does keep it up, I mean, he's such a special striker. We were talking about that earlier with other fighters as well, but Edwards is definitely an elite level striker. And I think he's going to probably continue that trend. He's just simply the better fighter here. I think as long as he avoids the ground, and again, Silva's wrestling's not the greatest, so I think Edwards can probably do that. He's gonna end up plastering Silva at some point. I mean, Edwards is that kind of special striker. So my pick is actually gonna be with the early action coming in, and I'm gonna agree with it. I think that Edwards does get the W here, and he's gonna be impressive in his UFC debut win.
And I'm in complete agreement. Leon Edwards is a nasty, nasty striker. And it's not just the technique when he's at distance. I think he's just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, when his opponents are shooting in to try to take him down. Obviously, people want to try to take him down because he is such a dangerous striker, and he's kind of added that Travis Brown defense against the fence where he just doesn't just fend off takedowns or takedown attempts. He punishes opponents for trying to take him down. And he makes them regret every second of it, mainly because he just starts unleashing knees and elbows the second that he's sprawled against the cage. So unless Claudio Silva can get in with the perfectly timed double leg underneath a looping hook or something, then Leon Edwards is going to get back into the fence and he's just going to start unloading on him. And that's just not something that Silva's very good at dealing with. This is a guy that basically needs the takedown at all costs if he wants to win any fight. He's just not very good on the feet, and while he is pretty solid on the ground, that's it. If he doesn't get it to the canvas, he's going to get in a world of hurt, whether it's getting knocked out or just getting beat up over the course of 3 rounds. He doesn't want either of those to happen. So honestly, I do not expect Silva to give Edwards a lot of space on the feet. He's probably going to crowd him. He's probably going to try to make this fight ugly, push him into the fence repeatedly, but unless he gets Edwards on his back, then he's going to be eating a lot of dirty boxing and tie elbows and knees the entire time that he's working for that takedown. So, I think that's the biggest reason that I like Edwards here. Edwards' takedown defense overall, he can be put on his back, but just the fact that he unleashes so much punishment on his opponents can turn fights completely around for him. So, honestly, he should be undefeated. I mean, his only loss was, a DQ loss due to an illegal knee. So unless Silva shoots in from his knees and eats one in the face on the way in and the fight's called, then I think that Leon Edwards is not just going to win, but he's going to win this fight convincingly. Now, sticking with the welterweight division, we have Ultimate Fighter Brazil Season 3 winner Warlley Alves, who is 8-0, taking on Alan Jouban, who is 10-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Alves minus 210, the comeback on Jouban plus 160. Jouban, excuse me if I'm butchering the name there. And since that time, actually, not too surprised, but Alves has creeped up a little bit. It's minus 240 for Alves. The comeback on Jouban is plus 180. So this is an interesting fight and a tough fight for both guys. I mean, both of them have made successful UFC debuts, and both of them, I think, have a tremendous upside. I mean, Jouban does definitely get better. He's more known for his striking attributes. I mean, the guy is a devastating striker. We were just talking about that again. It seems like quite a few fights we have some pretty decent strikers to watch and should be pretty fun. But Jouban's another one of these guys. He's a southpaw. He's got a lot of power. He mixes things up well. He's got good accuracy with his striking game. He's training at Black House, so he's getting better and a more well-rounded skill set. His wrestling and takedown defense continues to improve. But if anything, that's probably definitely his weakness, is getting put on his back, getting control a little bit there. But he does manage more times than not to scramble back up and make things interesting. And on the feet, he's more than capable of making life miserable for his opponents. Now, Alves, on the other hand, of course, he's the Ultimate Fighter, Tough Brazil 3 winner, middleweight winner, I should say. So he's dropping down to 170, which is a more natural fit for his weight class. And I think he's going to do some really good things at 170 here. But he's got that kind of hype around him. From the show, a lot of people believe that this guy can be a legit threat in a 170-pound division. And I think it's true. I mean, the guy has a very talented, well-rounded prospect in all aspects of the game. He's young. He's only 23 years old. So he's got that going for him as well. Just imagine how good this guy's going to be here in the next couple of years. Again, with that well-rounded skill set. But he is more of a grinder, more of a ground guy. He does have some stand-up skill, and he could be effective as well on the feet. He's got some power to go along with it. A nice clinch game, some good ground and pound when he does get you on the ground, and has good top control. And he's got decent takedown defense to go along with it. He's got a nasty guillotine choke as well. So the guy can finish you on the feet with his power. He can finish you on the ground with ground and pound. He can submit you. In all aspects of the game, again, he's just phenomenal to watch. And I think he's got a huge upside and a lot of potential, and he will make some waves. So another guy that's a hyped prospect that I think is going to live up to it more times than not. Now, he does have a very difficult test here in front of him, because this is no joke at all when you're fighting a guy like Alan Jouban. So I think that we're going to see a battle early on. It's going to be interesting, but I think eventually Alves is probably going to get the fight to the floor. Once he does get it to the floor, I think Jouban's going to have trouble getting up, and I think he could possibly end up getting submitted, getting caught with something along those lines. If not, I think Alves probably does enough to grind him out by unanimous decision. I think he wins at least 2 rounds, if not all 3. Because of his control of the cage and being able to kind of dictate the pace of the fight. So unfortunately for Jouban, I think it's just a bad stylistic matchup for him. So I do think he's going to lose his second fight in the UFC, and I think Alves is going to continue his winning ways.
And the thing that I really like here about Alves is his aggression. He does a really good job of mixing it up both on the feet and then with his transitions into his takedown attempts. He is constantly pressuring his opponent, whether it's with some big looping hooks or with some solid kicks to the head and body or even to the leg. And when he does that, the second that his opponent reacts, he can close the distance, get a body lock, shoot in for a takedown. Whatever's working best for him, he can do it. He's very well rounded, and honestly, I think this guy might have the best potential of any of the recent Ultimate Fighter winners. that the UFC's put out on any season in any country. This guy is rock solid, and he's still very young and improving rapidly. So this guy's legit to me. And the thing that scares me with Jouban, while he had a very impressive UFC debut in terms of how he finished Seth Baczynski, the thing that really bothers me is that all the things that happened before he finished Seth Baczynski. In that fight, he got blasted by Baczynski with a big hook, so he got, put on his keister, and then he also got taken down by Baczynski, who has significantly worse wrestling, in my opinion, than Alves. So he has a couple things going against him here because Alves hits incredibly hard, and he could definitely catch Jouban because Jouban's defense, honestly, is not very good, and Alves' takedowns are much better than Baczynski's, and he could definitely take down Jouban. One thing that is kind of funny to me is, Jouban has that history in the past as being a model, and it just kind of reminds me of that moment in Raging Bull where the guy looked pretty and he faced the main character, and he wasn't pretty no more. And I think that's kind of what's going to happen here. Jouban ain't going to be pretty no more after this fight. And Warlley Alves is just going to be too much for him, in my opinion. He can win this fight wherever he wants. Preferably, though, he's going to want to take this fight to the canvas where he can take away all the power of Jouban. And he probably should be able to keep him there because Alves has very strong hips. He has excellent top control. And he's just an extremely well-rounded fighter, which is very surprising for somebody so young. But this guy is got the hype for a reason, and I think he completely lives up to it on Saturday night, and we're going to see a really, really impressive performance by Alves. Now dropping down to the flyweight division, we have a pivotal top 10 matchup between Ian McCall, who is 13-4-1, taking on John Lineker, who is 24-7. Now Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened McCall minus 170, the comeback on Lineker plus 130. Right now over at 5 dimes, it is McCall minus 205, the comeback on Lineker's plus 165. So early action coming in on McCall. This is a tough fight, and it's very hard and difficult. For the early action, those guys that came in and laid the juice on McCall, I think it's kind of a risky bet against a fighter like Lineker with so much power. I mean, arguably the hardest hitter, and it's hard to argue it really, but the hardest hitter at 125 for sure. The guy pushes forward, has such a high pace, and he continues to improve his overall game. Now, of course, Lineker has some flaws in his preparation a little bit. I mean, he has trouble making weight, and sometimes his cardio isn't up to par where it should, but I mean, as far as improving his overall game, his takedown defense is getting better. I mean, tends to be a weakness at times for Lineker as well, but he's shown that his takedown defense is definitely improving. It's hard to get him to the ground. It's hard to control him once he is on the ground as well. And then again, his style that he pushes forward and has so much power and mixes things up well with his strike and goes to the body. He can knock you out with either hand. The guy has that killer instinct. I mean, he's a beast. Definitely. Now, that being said, he's in for a tough fight. McCall to me is arguably a top 3 guy at 125, obviously. I mean, the guy had some tremendous matchups with the champ. DJ, he fought well against, even in his loss to Benavidez. So McCall's legit. I mean, I think he's a total package as far as being well-rounded. He's fast. He's got good wrestling. He's got good stand-up skill. He's got a good submission game to go along with it. So, I mean, should be really a tremendous fight. And I think what McCall's going to look to do is kind of use his footwork and movement and his speed to get in and out a little bit on Lineker, maybe try to mix in a takedown or two and just basically try to outpoint Lineker. Now Lineker is going to be the one again pushing forward and trying to take McCall's head off along the way. The fight being in Brazil, it makes this one a tough pick for me, to be honest with you. I think that Lineker is getting McCall probably at a good time here. And if he does pull off the upset win, we're going to see probably Lineker fighting for a title here soon. So this is a big fight for both guys. And I've been kind of bouncing back and forth on it. I know logic says if this fight hits the scorecards, McCall might edge out a decision here. But you know what? My gut's telling me that Lineker is going to pull this thing off, either by KO or even maybe a controversial type of close decision win for Lineker. So for the time being, I have been bouncing back and forth on this fight, but I'm going to pick the dog Lineker here. I think that he could pull off the W here. I'm going to wait for my official staff pick, I guess you could say, on MMAoddsbreaker.com after weigh-ins to see how Lineker makes weight and to see how McCall looks and both these guys look, I think the weigh-ins are going to be important for this fight. So my official pick will be posted on MMAOddsbreaker.com. But for right now, I am going to pick Lineker.
And at least for now, I'm definitely going to disagree. I just think that Ian McCall is going to be too well-rounded for Lineker. Now, obviously, Lineker's takedown defense looked much better in his most recent fight against Alpaz Kilic, but you have to remember in that fight, Kilic perplexingly decided to stand and bang with Lineker over the course of 3 rounds, didn't attempt a ton of takedowns, and he paid the price. Guys that just stand in the pocket and trade strikes with John Lineker are gonna get knocked out eventually. He just has that type of power at 125 pounds that most people don't possess. Ian McCall, while he's very tough, if he chooses to do the same strategy, he's gonna end up the same way. But I think that he's a significantly smarter fighter, and he has a very good skill set that complements his ability to use smart game plans. And the game plan for this fight, in my opinion, is going to be stand and trade with Lineker just long enough to lower his guard and then shoot in for a takedown and just completely work over Lineker on the canvas. Lineker, while he is extremely dangerous on the feet, we saw in the Ali Bagautinov fight that a really good wrestler with solid top control is going to have their way with him. Now, obviously, while Lineker's takedown defense looked better, there's no way it improved enough that he's going to be able to take out and completely stifle an elite wrestler. And McCall, while not the best wrestler in the division, he definitely has a really solid top game. I mean, he's the only fighter on the current UFC roster that was able to dominate Demetrius Johnson on the ground. So, the guy definitely has some skills there. And for this fight, I really think that the improvements in McCall's defense are going to become a huge factor because he cannot afford to eat a lot of shots from Lineker. Lineker just hits too hard, and McCall does not have the greatest chin. So the ability to not just deflect punishment, but completely avoid it is going to be pivotal for him if he wants to have success, because Lineker throws everything with incredibly bad intentions, and if he connects with enough, then he's going to knock out anybody, and including McCall. So McCall needs to use that improving footwork and head movement, get out of the way of Lineker's big shots, and when Lineker overcommits, shoot in, take him down, and just start beating him up and slowing him down. And then the more he does that, the harder it's going to be for Lineker to land that knockout blow late in the fight. So I really do think that the well-roundedness of Ian McCall is going to be a huge factor here. The wrestling is going to be very important, and I can definitely see Ian McCall pulling this one out. And I don't really think I need to see the weigh-ins. I really think that he's got this one in the bag. So my pick is going to be Ian McCall. Now, what do the numbers tell us for this one, Reed?
Well, first and foremost, they confirm what we're saying about John Lineker. He is a hard hitter. 7 career knockdowns in the UFC. He's basically right there neck and neck with John Dodson, except Lineker's been doing it at featherweight or at flyweight the whole time. His knockdown rate is on par with that of a heavyweight. So when he hits people, there is a good chance they're going to fall down. And on the other side, Ian McCall has been dropped twice. He's the older fighter. He's at a reach disadvantage. So there are some reasons to think that knockout could happen. They both fight at a high pace, but Lineker clearly is a more aggressive guy. Right out of the gates, we haven't seen him, necessarily prove that he has awesome cardio, but out of the gates in the first round, he comes out at a blazing speed. I mean, no one on the card, Friday or Saturday this weekend strikes at the pace that he strikes at. And he's generally the one controlling the cage. He's outworking his opponents, and McCall tends to lay back. But McCall does have very good defense in the sense that he doesn't get hit a lot. He has been dropped, but he doesn't get hit a lot. He's very quick in and out. We saw some really good combinations in and out. He made Brad Pickett miss quite a bit in his last fight. But John Lineker is definitely a more dangerous striker than Brad Pickett. So if this is purely a standing battle, there is a lot of reason to think that there's some upset potential. However, on the mat, definitely Ian McCall has the advantage. I mean, this is a guy that got back mount on Demetrius Johnson, in their draw. He's very skilled, well-rounded, all over the place. His takedown accuracy is not good. He doesn't really attempt a lot of takedowns. But when he's been on the ground, his ground time and control share is 95%. That's abnormally high considering he has been in the cage with Joseph Benavidez, Demetrius Johnson twice. He has been in there with some good wrestlers and he generally has gotten out unscathed on the mat. John Lineker, on the other hand, has been dominated on the ground. He's only been in control 20% of the time. So there's some style contrast here. There's definitely some fuel for the upset pick, especially the longer they stand, because Lineker really only needs one of those shots to land to put McCall away. I think McCall is the smarter fighter overall, and he should mix it up. But if he doesn't, if he gets risky, if at some point after a stand-up or the start of a round he gets clipped, it's over. So this is an awesome matchup. I think this is definitely fight of the night material, especially given how the main event has transpired. So, it's a must-watch fight. I do want to see how Lineker does with the weigh-ins before really committing to a pick. Also seeing where the line ends up. If there's value on Lineker, he makes an interesting play, but McCall has more ways to win this. He's certainly at risk though.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, moving on to the main event of the evening, we have former champion Mauricio Shogun Rua, who is 22-9, taking on late replacement Ovince St. Preux, who is 16-6. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Rua minus 165 to come back on OSP plus 125. Right now over at Dimes, it is minus 165 still on Shogun and plus 135 for OSP. So line just basically tightened up a little bit, line staying steady. This is kind of an interesting matchup. Of course, Manoa's out and OSP's replacing him. He was on the card anyway. So it's not really much of a shakeup, and stylistically it's an interesting fight. I mean, Shogun, as we all know, he's had a heck of a career. I mean, he's fought the who's who in his days in Pride and so far to UFC. I mean, obviously being a former light heavyweight champion, he's accomplished the ultimate goal in winning that strap. So he's been in there with the best. The guy's definitely talented. He is getting a little bit up there in age though now. I mean, he's 32 years old, but I think he's way beyond that as far as fight years go because of the damage he sustained throughout. I mean, the guy's a tremendous fighter. The crazy thing is he keeps on improving his game. Especially, I think, his wrestling and his takedown defense and his overall top control and his, I think, fight IQ overall, too. So he has gotten better, but, I mean, his body's just taken so much punishment throughout that it starts to scare me a little bit, worry me. You gotta be concerned with when a guy's been in that many great fights and that many wars. Now, OSP, on the other hand, I mean, the guy's a little bit younger, a little bit fresher. Well, he's actually officially 1 year younger, so let me clarify a little bit. But again, in fight years, the guy's a lot fresher than Shogun. He's gonna have some interesting advantages here. One of them, obviously, is gonna be the reach. He's gonna have a decent little reach advantage over Shogun. I believe it's around 4 inches or so. He's gonna be a little bit taller. The guy has some power, and he's another one of these guys that's very athletic, that keeps on improving his overall skill set. The guy's tough to deal with on the feet usually. Now Shogun is going to have the advantage on the feet. He's a better pure striker, but still with the length, OSP is definitely going to present some problems, and he's got power to go along with it. Now on the ground, I actually give the advantage to Shogun there as well. I think Shogun's, at this point, he's got the better wrestling. He should be able to get top control more often than OSP, but I could see this fight kind of going back and forth on the mat a little bit too, and OSP wouldn't shock me if he does get top position at a time or two throughout, because even though Shogun's takedown defense has improved, he still manages to end up on his back against solid fighters at times. So that's going to be a possibility as well. Really, this is, like I said, kind of a tough fight. And as far as betting goes, it makes it that much more difficult because I think it's kind of a no-brainer. Shogun is the better fighter, more complete fighter, but laying the juice, that much juice, it's not, I guess, too high of a price, but at the same time, laying $165 over a guy with that much, taking that much punishment and kind of that old in fight years is not always a good idea. There's so many fights on this card, it's probably a better idea to just pass this fight overall or take a shot at OSP as a dog. And that being said, I am going to pick Shogun though, because more times than not, he should win this fight. I think he's got, obviously you can't count him out as far as knockout power goes. I mean, he can knock you out. Again, he can control the fight a little bit more and maybe grind out a decision as well. But OSP, I think from his loss in Bader, he's going to actually be a little bit more confident coming into this fight. He knows he can go 5 strong rounds. He did fade a little bit in that fight, of course, but he still proved a lot, I think, to himself. And that experience going against an elite top flight fighter as Bader, I think is going to really pay off for him as well. So I'm expecting the best OSP that we've seen to step in here and give Shogun a really tough test. But my official pick is going to be Shogun.
My main thing here is the late notice replacement of Ovince St. Preux in a 5-round fight. The fact that they're not moving it down to a 3-round fight. That's kind of a big deal. Even though OSP went 5 rounds in his last fight, I still think that there's no way that he was just completely ready for a 5-round fight. So I think that's going to be a problem for him if this fight goes long. And obviously the fact that every time that OSP has really stepped up to the top level guys at light heavyweight, he really hasn't performed at all. Obviously this goes all the way back to when he fought Mousasi in Strikeforce when he got dominated, and then his most recent fight against Bader, another guy that's a top 10 light heavyweight, got crushed. So, heading in there against Shogun, even though Shogun, in my opinion, is on a decline, even though Shogun isn't the fighter he used to be, Shogun should still be able to win this fight. On the feet, even though OSP has the reach advantage, there's no way that he knows how to utilize it good enough to stifle somebody that's as competent a striker as Shogun Rua. Shogun got knocked out by Dan Henderson, but I mean, he was dominating that fight. Just walked into something stupidly, left his guard down just enough to eat an H-bomb, but he clearly still has a ton of power. He's extremely dangerous, not just with his hands, but with his knees, with his legs. He mixes it up well on the feet. He's very, very dangerous in the stand-up realm. And on the ground, while OSP probably has a little bit better wrestling, I don't think that he'll be able to take Shogun down and beat him up or work him over with submissions, because Shogun's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is solid. He can retain guard. He can get back to his feet. He should be better than OSP just about everywhere in this fight. The only thing that I'm really concerned about is the wear and tear. Now, obviously, even though OSP is a little bit older, as Nick mentioned, the fight years, and fight years are more about the damage you've taken over the course of your career, and Shogun has been in some absolute wars. Those fights against Dan Henderson, both of them, those take years off your life, and they definitely take years off your career. And, there was a reason that people were talking about Shogun retiring. The fights like that, those are the ones that really, really take it out of you. And OSP really hasn't taken that kind of damage in fights, so he hasn't had that build up to him. So, even if OSP lands something that's not incredibly nasty, he could really hurt Shogun just because the wear and tear and your chin starts to deteriorate a little bit over the course of your career. So that is a concern, but I don't think it's a big enough concern that it's going to be a huge factor in this fight. So, in my opinion, at some point, Shogun's either going to knock out OSP or he's just gonna beat him up and wear him down over the course of 5 rounds. So this is definitely Shogun's fight to lose, in my opinion. OSP just isn't at that level, and I'm not sure he'll ever be at that level as long as he stays training in Tennessee and not at an elite gym. So my pick is going to be Mauricio Shogun Rua. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us?
Well, it is as murky as you guys say it is. It's tough to call here. Both guys come in with huge knockdown rates, so way beyond the average for their peers, very similar to each other, in fact. Rua is the slightly more accurate striker. OSP is the more controlling striker, and which is to be expected for a guy with a 79-inch reach. He's also a southpaw. So in terms of stalking, OSP might have the advantage. But defensively, I think Rua, we talk about his age. He's 33 now, or he will be this month. He has taken more damage more recently in his career, yet his chin rating is actually probably better than the average for his peer group. OSP is completely clean in that respect, at least with his measured competition, hasn't taken any knockdowns or knockouts. But Rua, he clearly can be caught. He got over aggressive with Dan Henderson even after scoring all those knockdowns. He is at risk, certainly, against a younger, longer southpaw who does pack a lot of power. Rua obviously is the more skilled overall mixed martial artist here, but we've seen plenty of times in the past, Glover Teixeira versus Phil Davis comes to mind, that is not always a recipe for success. People can grind you down, people can wrestle, a bigger, younger guy can just use his athletic traits to just grind out that decision. 5 rounds is a long time for OSP though. That would be unusual if he can. We saw him basically fold against Ryan Bader. I mean, he was just out wrestled there. Hua probably can't do that same thing. And OSP, his wrestling stats are actually a little bit better. Now again, strength of competition, Hua certainly very competent on the ground with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, dangerous. OSP's submission wins in the UFC probably will not occur here against Hua. OSP has a better chance to strike this one out. But it's pretty murky. It's like you guys say, I mean, this is a really tough one to call. I think it's very soon to be seeing OSP in against a guy like Shogun Hua. Just the amount of experience that Hua brings in is so different from what OSP is offering. And that's why I have a lot of trouble believing some of the numbers in front of me, just because the people they've faced are so different. The numbers are not really apples to apples here. But certainly just based on his size, strength, youth, power, OSP does have a chance for an upset here. He has to get lucky a little bit. You know, he has to catch Hua. I think Hua just overall is the better fighter. If he fights his game and he doesn't get clipped, you know, he can probably take this fight anywhere, and look good. I just worry about, you know, that Hail Mary shot. So this is a tricky one to bet. It's a tricky one to pick. It makes for a compelling fight. I think this one will be a lot slower and more deliberate. I think both fighters are going to be respecting each other's power. So this may not be the fight of the night guarantee, especially with the flyweights before them. But intriguing nonetheless, because it's a huge step up for OSP. If he wins, hey, this is going to catapult him up the rankings, and that's interesting in its own right. It's still a compelling fight though. Very tough one to pick.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 56. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday afternoon around 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsbreaker.com premium member. And if you're not a member, you can sign up for us at MMAOddsbreaker.com/premium. Now, if we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at Premium Oddscast or at MMAOB_premium on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll hook you up that way. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there, so you can stay up to date with everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this week.